SAVCA, 20 years in review. 2018 marks a significant milestone for SAVCA as we celebrate 20 years of the association serving the venture capital and private equity industry. SAVCA was established 20 years ago in 1998 when Joe Schwanker, the head of business partners, planted the seed by contacting some of the CEOs who were operating in private equity at the time and suggested that an industry body be formed.
I started talking to some of the guys and they said, you know, we really should form an association. We talked and one day I said, well, let's do it.
Schwanker and a handful of founding members went on to establish SAVCA in 1998. One of the association's founding members and current chairman, Craig Dreyer, says having an association would enable the private equity and venture capital industry to have an industry body that would speak in a unified voice.
A view that there needed to be an industry to make representation, for example, to regulators, an industry to promote itself.
But in the early days of SAVCA, the private equity industry was not very well known in South Africa, which posed a significant challenge in promoting the asset class.
Private equity was, in 98, 99, was not well known. So there was a very large educational task to happen in terms of the industry beginning to promote itself.
After laying the foundations at SAVCA, Schwenker handed the reins over to Malcolm Siegel in 2002.
When I took over the chairmanship of SAVCA, it was really quite an embryonic organization. There was a board, a very active board, but we had no offices, no infrastructure, and minimal resources. So the task really was to establish it on firm foundations so that it could become really a sustainable and representative of the industry.
Over time, the association became the representative of the industry and membership fees were put in place to better resource the association in serving the industry. As the association grew and the value offering became more clear, the association was in a position to move into its own offices and employ its first full-time CEO, JP Fourie, in 2006. This helped SAVCA achieve a new level of professionalism and also roll out its mandate.
I joined way back in 2006. And at the time there was a need for a full-time executive officer given that the scale of the industry was really starting to ramp up. We managed to make some decent headway in regulatory front or on the regulatory front, specifically the taxation of realization gains in the hands of investors.
The key foundations SAVCA needed to lay at the time were research, professionalism and membership. The value proposition to members was enhanced through the launch of the annual Private Equity Industry Survey, the SAVCA Foundation, and advanced training programs. Numerous networking events for members and the introduction of SAVCA's industry conference in 2008 added to the credibility of SAVCA in its advocacy efforts. But post the global financial crisis, private equity suffered from negative publicity, both in South Africa and abroad, and the industry was heavily regulated.
It was just, hot on the heels of the post the global financial crisis. So there was an inordinate amount of regulation being passed across various government departments that is going to limit the flexibility and the ability of the industry to do transactions.
In the backdrop of the negative perception of private equity around the time and seeking to keep the messaging of developmental impact of the private equity industry front of mind for government and investors, SAVCA published its first Economic Impact Report in partnership with the Developmental Bank of South Africa in 2009.
A couple of the things that we addressed was to bring legislative bodies across government closer to the private equity industry so that we can find each other and find a common purpose.
Shortly after Emile Du Toit took over the reins as SAVCA chairman from Cora Fernandez, he was tasked with finding a replacement for then outgoing CEO JP Fourie, who had been leading the association for 6 years.
It was really difficult. We initially managed to secure for a short-term period services of Malcolm Siegel, who also has been around from the beginning. One of the specific intended consequences of actually appointing Erika van der Merwe as an outsider really in the industry to become CEO was really that we as a board felt quite strongly that that we had to transition the association from a very inward-looking technical association, really just dealing with the nuts and bolts and regulatory issues, to an association that is more market-friendly, more outward-focused and much more visible.
When Du Toit's term as SAVCA chairman came to an end in 2014, Dave Stadler was appointed as the new chairman. Stadler sat with the new CEO, Erica van der Merwe, to reset SAVCA's vision, mission, values and strategic goals.
We had reset the mission to be for SAVCA to be the champion of private equity and venture capital in Southern Africa. So that was the overriding consideration. We wanted to be seen as the authority on private equity and venture capital in Southern Africa.
The mandate given to me at that stage of SAVCA's life was to raise the profile of the organisation and of the industry. We worked towards this vision by being very deliberate about what we communicated about the industry, how we communicated, and to whom we communicated. This industry is a force for good, for businesses, for the local community, and for the broader economy. That the DNA of this industry is that of active and accountable stewardship.
Stadler and van der Merwe continued to refine the messaging of SAVCA, a task they successfully achieved by the time they both left their respective offices in 2017. In March 2017, SAVCA recruited its third full-time CEO, Tanya van Lille, to take over from van der Merwe and continue the board's mandate in enhancing the value proposition to members, which include, among others, asset class promotion.
SAVCA published the private equity and venture capital case studies last year, and in those case studies you can see examples of real impact.
The asset class promotion remains an enormous challenge. There's a lot of work to be done there in terms of educating trustees and continuing to promote the asset class.
The future indeed looks bright for SAVCA, and it continues to improve its value proposition to both members and the venture capital and private equity industries as a whole.
I don't have a crystal ball to predict the next 20 years of SAVCA, but in the next few years what we want to achieve is to see more institutional investors excited and interested about the both private equity and venture capital asset classes and investing more in these asset classes, and also show how these investments has had and made a positive impact. So we will continue with our regulatory efforts, we will continue to promote the asset class, and we will also make sure that we continuously add value to our members.
The journey of SAVCA in the past 20 years has indeed been a fruitful one, with SAVCA and the industry proving that private equity can be a force for good. Here's to 20 more years of advocacy work in Southern Africa.